It is the weekly, it is the Blue Room, and it is another, unfortunately, disappointing Everton week. Joining me, though, to go through it all, are Paddy Boyland from The Athletic. Paddy is slumped in his chair, typical grouch on, but now the show started, he's got a smile on his face.
Sat up now.
Go on, mate.
I've sat up now, haven't I? I'm all present and correct for the show.
Fully attentive to talk about the last few days. Mark Mosey joins us as well. Mose, how are you?
Yeah, Paddy reminded me of that video clip where like Maradona just kind of like messes about in the warm-up and doesn't really seem that bothered. And as soon as the first whistle goes, he's the best person on the call or on the pitch, as it was. So likened to the great man.
I thought you were going to say the image of Christopher Walken that's doing the rounds. Have you seen that? Christopher Walken in the airport departure lounge.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make you Maradona here.
I saw someone say that the Christopher Walken image is what they look like watching Michael Keane try and play on Tuesday. Also joining us today, Mick Greeno as well. I mean, Mick, Paddy's been compared to Maradona. I mean, quite a lot to live up to for you. I'm Mose on the show today.
Yeah, it's true. I don't think I'm going to get any Maradona comparisons, but actually I think I'm coming into this in quite a buoyant mood. Same with Paddy. We both saw an Everton victory last night, so quite happy. Just a shame it wasn't the first team.
We will get. Everton beating PSG in a European tie. Let's frame it like that. We will get onto that a bit later on, but we will start off with what happened on the South Coast earlier this week on Tuesday. And just before we get into the nuts and bolts of the game, I just wanted to ask you all: is Junior Stanislas now overtaken Jon Stead as the most inexplicably average player to score so often every time against Everton? I mean, Paddy, he hadn't scored a goal since March 2021, I think it was, Junior Stanislas. And as soon as you saw his name on the team sheet, as it was with Stead, as it was with Paul Sharner, you just kind of know that the lad's going to find the back of the net. It's mad, isn't it?
Les Ferdinand had that as well, but
he was actually really good.
That was what I was about to say. He was actually good, so it kind of made sense. But with this, it's kind of, it's inexplicable, really, isn't it? And every time you see him, he strikes the fear of God into you. As the Vitality Stadium does in general. For me, it's one of those stadiums that just kind of triggers me, even when I just see it on television. Turf Moor has that effect now after last season too. I don't ever want to go back to Turf Moor because of that game last season. But yes, it's Stanislas. I mean, you say, has he overtaken Paul Sharner? If he hasn't already, then he will do on Saturday.
that's the thing, isn't it, Mose? Like, as much as he's not been in the fort all season, if you're Gary O'Neill, you're getting that lad in the 11 somehow, aren't you, at the weekend?
I wonder what his profession is when he's not playing for Bournemouth against Everton, because I'm not fully convinced that in between those two fixtures a season he's actually a footballer.
No, he's a 53-year-old used car salesman by trade that plays against Everton every now and then. That's all it is.
Yeah, absolute bagsman when the Toffees come to town. But I have absolutely no evidence that he ever kicks a ball other than into our net. Speaking of the Vitality Stadium, is it just the once we've won there?
Yes.
Where Delafeu and Lukaku were, I remember them having
that was one of the free frees. But I've got a quiz question for you all about Everton at Bournemouth later on, so we'll come on to that and all will be revealed. But we have got to talk about what happened on the pitch. Mick, 11 changes. Did you kind of see a performance like that coming, if not necessarily a result as one-sided and as brutal as that when you saw that team?
Yeah, I was going to say, I just kind of felt sorry for everyone involved from an Everton side on Tuesday. Obviously, I could not imagine having to travel all the way down to watch that and then do it all again on Saturday. But from a fan perspective, and even just, I think from a fan perspective who didn't go and who kind of still trying to grapple onto the hope that Everton won't be involved in some sort of relegation battle to no matter what extent, really. I think Tuesday was a bit of a reality check in that sense, even though we did make 11 changes, I don't think you'd be surprised really if our first 11 kind of popped up with the same result on Saturday or obviously even on Tuesday, and then again from the players and from the manager side, both of them just kind of looked a bit hopeless and a bit. I don't want to say, obviously, I don't feel sorry for some of the players because they've had their chance, and when you think about the likes of Michael Keane, etc. But no one kind of seemed to know what they were trying to do, and that I think comes from Lampard as well. I think quite a few times the camera was obviously panning to him, and I know his bench wasn't particularly the strongest considering some of the absentees on Tuesday, but it was one of them games where it was just a bit like it kind of reminded me painfully a lot of the Crystal Palace game in the Cup last season when I think they scored 4 that day as well, didn't they? And I'm sure the team probably wasn't too dissimilar either, but it was just a bit sad, really.
Yeah. Do you feel like Paddy Everton sort of preempted the calls for fans to be refunded by paying for tickets and transport before the game? Maybe Frank Lampard said, "Listen, I'm gonna make 11 changes here. We could get levered. Get ahead of this now and cut it off. You don't want to be facing these calls for fans to be refunded."
Well, it is also quite an achievement, given the gesture from the club, to still make fans feel as though they've been hard changed here. And they did do that with knobs on, didn't they? With the performance against Bournemouth on Tuesday night. I think there are a couple of things here. The first for me is that he makes 11 changes, and I think that shows you that the focus quite clearly is still just pulling away from that relegation zone. If there's one aim this season, it's to stabilise, to not be in a relegation battle, and ultimately to not be relegated. So I think all eggs are in the Premier League basket right now. When you're in mid-table, as Everton have been, and well, certainly in other recent years, you can kind of look at the cup competitions and target them because you get to March and April and you've not got that much to play for. But Everton haven't got that luxury right now. So it was clear that he wanted to rest people like Tarkowski, Pickford, Cody, particularly with some of those guys about to be named in World Cup squads. Everton know when you scratch below the surface, there's not much beyond the first 11, and even the first 11 in places is in dire need of reinforcement. The same players that were in effect replaced over the summer in the starting 11, so Doucouré, Davis, Holgate, Keane, come back into the side, and you again see why they were replaced. It was very disjointed. I suppose the other part of this is that a lot of those lads in mitigation haven't kicked the ball in anger for 2.5 months. In some cases, that was the first time they played this season. So you would expect it to be a little bit disjointed. Maybe not as disjointed as it was, I should point out, but you would expect it to be a little bit disjointed. And then I suppose the final part of this for me is that whatever system they play and whichever personnel they play, there are still some what I consider to be underlying issues within the team and the structure and how they look to play the game, whether it's 3 at the back or as it was on Tuesday or 4 at the back as it was at the weekend. They seem to have issues in the midfield in terms of spacing, in terms of ball progression, all these kinds of things. James Garner, as Idrissa Gueye was at the weekend, was a little bit swamped in there. You look at the way Everton look to play through the number 6, but that becomes utterly predictable. And the opposition know that as soon as the centre-half has the ball, they're right on the back of the defensive midfielder, and Everton ultimately don't have anywhere to go. The result then becomes long, aimless balls forward, and I suppose that's all well and good when you've got Dominic Calvert-Lewin, a fit and firing Dominic Calvert-Lewin on the side, but when it's Neil Maupay at 5'8", you've not got a hope in hell. So there are elements here that kind of cut through every single Everton performance in recent weeks. There are trends that, even if it's Michael Keane, Mason Holgate, James Tarkowski, and Conor Cody at the other end, there are things that characterise Everton. And obviously one of them is a lack of kind of coherence in the final third. So another disappointing night. I don't think, even with 11 changes, they should be losing 4-1 to Bournemouth anyway, whether it's Bournemouth's first 11, whether it's Bournemouth's effectively B team as it was on Tuesday. I think they're good enough not to be humiliated like that. But they certainly haven't got the luxury of rotating a full 11 and going away and sweeping past teams. That's just not where Everton are at this moment in time.
Yeah, it was an absolute mess, wasn't it, Moose? And it just like sort of moving it on a little bit and looking at it from like sort of different perspective. How did you sort of feel as a fan watching that capitulation in the second half and the results afterwards? Because people sort of appreciated before the game that we had to make changes. You know, there are people who are very much in the camp still of we haven't won a trophy for years and years. We've still got to take this all very seriously. But there's definitely a creeping, section of our fan base that are thinking it is all about staying up now, and that team selection was justified, with that in mind. So when you see a result like that, and when Everton go out the League Cup in that manner, I suppose sort of what I'm asking is, are you that arsed? Does it still sting in the way in which I remember being at Goodison Park probably, 5, 6, 7 years ago now, and I was getting beat by Norwich and Stephen Naismith scoring and thinking, God, that's a massive opportunity gone. Now, when we go to the competition, and listen, it was humiliating on Tuesday, but actually being out of it certainly doesn't sting quite as much anymore, given what we potentially got to come.
I found it really hard to care at any point during or after the game. The epitome of how much I didn't think that Everton were ever in with a shot of winning this trophy was that when you messaged me the day after, rattling off the big names in the Premier League who had fallen out of the tournament, I thought, well, I'm still not in any way convinced that Blackburn or Notts Forest wouldn't have knocked us out, because that absolutely would have happened down the line. I think Paddy kind of alluded to the fact that I don't think Everton are in a healthy enough point to consider challenging for any domestic cup at the moment. I totally echo what you've just said, Matt, in terms of this club always wants to do great things and we want to win trophies, and regardless of the stature of that trophy when that day does ultimately come, we'll all be elated, and the Carabao Cup will be an enormous achievement. We are just quite simply not in a position to push on and in any way prioritise that. And Frank Lampard shares that view. And I think the only thing that annoyed me about Frank phoning in that game, which is quite honestly what happened, I think you do not make 11 changes to your starting lineup if you care in any way about the result. And, we're never going to hear that audio from the club, and rightly so. But what I was left with on Tuesday when the lineup was announced was this kind of awkward purgatory Everton 11 of players who we've all now learned far too much about. If Everton are going to make 11 changes in a League Cup game away at Bournemouth, I want to see some of the younger lads dragged in. I've never seen half of them kick a football, and I could not tell you whether they're better than Decore or Davis or any of the people that Paddy mentioned earlier on. But there's at least an element of learning there for me to do as an Everton fan about them. The one thing that Frank Lampard said in the aftermath of that game that really buoyed me, and I think probably the only positive that came out of the whole thing, was that he himself admitted that he'd learnt lessons, and that will be reflected both in personnel and setup going into Saturday and into the future. If that's true, and we, I think it was yourself, Matt, who mentioned the Minnesota game and the kind of similarities. I saw that game as an enormous positive in pre-season, because it really allowed Frank Lampard to point a number of fingers at a number of players, at the board, and say, look, these things have to change in order for that not to happen again. It's ridiculous that 3 months down the line, we're kind of hoping that this will also have the same effect. That those games should be years apart in terms of how you change your whole team for the future. But if that's something that we can use and build on, then fine. But there was so many points during the game where, as goals were going in and as certain players were making mistakes, that you just thought, I knew all of this 2 weeks ago, 2 years ago. I knew all of these things that I'm thinking and saying were going to be said, because we know that certain individuals, and we don't have to name them, we all know the players in this squad who aren't capable of coming in and doing a good enough job to emulate Everton's best 11. and regardless of whoever that is, I think we're still clambering to see who includes himself in that 11. But I think to bring in the players that he did, and also change the system. I think that, people have spoken about Frank Lampard getting it tactically wrong at a number of times this season, and there'll be minor things about the setup of the midfield three, for example, which I think has definitely changed a number of times in recent weeks. But I think on a grander scale, to go to 5 at the back, I've constantly said that I in no way think that Everton are good enough at changing their system, and in particular changing to that system on a one-off basis to suit an individual game. We are simply not tactically good enough to do that. And I've seen us gain a little bit of stability with a 4-3-3. And I'm clutching here because we've won one game in what feels like 3 or 4 months. And I know that's not true, but to at least be able to look at an 11 and imagine what that's going to be 2 hours before kickoff. And I know that the midfield three in particular has been a massive focus. I've just about started to gain some form of identity about what my Everton team is going to look like on a Saturday afternoon. And that, obviously from a personnel point of view, but from a tactical point of view, that just got totally lashed out the window on Tuesday night. I can't think of a bigger indicator of Frank Lampard's mindset as to how much he didn't care about that game as to lashing just those 3 lads, as he must call them, in the sense of and we just give them their 90 minutes and let's just crack on with the important stuff. If Tuesday was all about learning individual lessons about fringe players, then fine, do that. But for me, that's what training's about. We mentioned about these players not having played a game for 6 to 8 weeks. They are professional sportsmen who live in a constant state of readiness to be picked for that side. And Frank Lampard said as much. He said, these are lads who get paid a lot by the club. I think he alluded to the fact that some of them have been banging on the door to get involvement in the Premier League team. I will not accept the fact that they don't play competitive football enough, because if they are competitive enough themselves, then they're doing that every single day of the week. It was useful from this point of view. It made me angry. It made me realise all of the things that I think about certain players, and probably the whole club in general, were validated on Tuesday night. But I just for once want to see one of those games happen, and for us to learn a lot from it and to develop and change from it. But, ask me now as we record on Thursday afternoon, will I see an enormous grand change on Saturday, or will we see something that was very similar to Tuesday night? I'll probably lean towards the latter, unfortunately.
I don't think playing a back three necessarily has to be the reason why Everton lose or draw or win games. I don't think it has to be the difference. What I would say about the lineup on Tuesday is that it didn't really seem to be particularly complementary. I mean, it didn't seem particularly well suited to being to playing a back three. You've got kind of a central pillar in Yerry Mina, who's meant to be the kind of the big dominant one who wins everything in the air. Mason Holgate on the right can be a little bit more aggressive and push higher and kind of cover space. But then on the other side, you'd almost expect another version of Holgate, like a Ben Godfrey type. And that was Michael Keane, who was just asked to defend kind of large swathes of space. And I don't think that ever works for Michael Keane. That's when he himself said his worst. Those lads, as Lampard suggested, have been banging down the door for selection. And I think there is a case for giving some fringe players opportunities in the Carabao Cup, particularly in the circumstances we've mentioned with Everton this season. I suppose the issue is, if you do that and you want to kind of create this sense of belonging, then everybody's got to buy into it. And you've got to go out there and show that what you're doing in training, you can replicate in games. We all know there's a difference between what they do at Finch Farming matches, where some players will look $1 million, and then the cut and thrust of any kind of game against Premier League opposition. And too many of them just fail to do the absolute basics. You've got, I mean, the second goal, the first goal is comical. That just fluky, the way that goes in. But you could make a point about Michael Keane standing off and allowing the shot to go in the first place and giving up too much space. The second goal is comical Everton. like absolute peak Everton. Like if you played that and said what level of football are those lads at, you'd say probably non-league or Sunday league, wouldn't you?
It was very reminiscent of either the fourth or fifth goal Watford scored in that game of Goodison last year, where it just felt like everyone just fell over under the pressure.
That's in like the 100th minute of play, not like after half time.
Yeah, with the Benny Hill music playing over it, like you've seen that over YouTube time and time again, and I feel like quite a lot of the other goals followed that pattern as well. So it just became utterly predictable. The players that were shifted out of the starting lineup last year because they could not do the basics right were back in the team against Bournemouth, and that created a huge issue. The problem is Everton have gone into self-preservation mode here, and Lampard has as well, and it's all about picking up points in the league. But if you go into self-preservation mode, but somehow make it worse, as Everton did on Tuesday night, then you add to this kind of growing sense of unease at the moment. They played really poorly against Leicester, tanked out of the cup by Bournemouth on Tuesday night, and that makes Saturday's game an even more of a pressurised scenario because you're on a losing streak. The fans are a bit more disgruntled than they would have been, particularly the ones that had to go down and watch that dross against Bournemouth. Creates huge amounts of pressure for the game on Saturday. And if they'd won in midweek, that would have taken a bit of pressure off. So almost in going into self-preservation mode, he's actually made it even harder for the team to compete on Saturday. I suppose it was just, it was an almighty mess, as we know, an almighty mess, and one of those games you want to forget quickly now and get back to the bread and butter of the Premier League.
Yeah, I think in terms of when you talk about like a self-preservation mode, especially over the last couple of weeks, I think the last 3 fixtures, you could probably talk about half a decent 20 minutes against Fulham, and that's about it in terms of trying to cling on to some positives. And when you look at those opponents in terms of Fulham, Leicester and Bournemouth, there's 2 newly promoted teams there, and then a team, bear in mind they've still got a lot of quality in that team. I think they're still, or they were below us. I don't know if they are anymore, but you're talking about 3 teams in and around us, or at least 2 of them who you'd expect to be fighting for their lives at the end of the season. I know Fulham have started well, but I can't see it particularly lasting at the level it has been recently. And yet the performances have been probably quite desperate, really. The second half against Bournemouth was terrifying, really. And I know there was a lot of changes, but at the same time, Bournemouth had more or less made, I don't think they changed 11 players, but you're talking about a reserve team, really, for a side that struggled in the end, that had to crawl over the line to get promoted to the Premier League. And then you've got our team, which really have, in a lot of cases, international players who have a lot of experience at the Premier League. And I echo Mark's point before in terms of wanting to see the younger players who really have something to fight for, because when Lampard mentions players knocking at the door, I highly doubt those players include Frank Lampard. Well, I don't think it includes Frank Lampard.
Apparently he's Boston training all the players.
I highly doubt it includes Michael Keane or Asmir Begovic, players that we already know where they are in terms of the standing of this squad. But yeah, I think it's just screams a bit desperate the last couple of weeks, and all of a sudden Saturday was going to be a big game anyway, but Saturday's even a bigger game now, because there's got to be an element of, well, this is why I put the team out on Tuesday to get this result, and also this, you can see the difference between the performance now compared to Tuesday as well, now that we've changed all the players. Like Mark said, I don't know really if we're going to actually see that much of a big difference that I think Frank's probably relying on, really.
Just very, very quickly, Mick, I know you want to make a point, Paddy, but Paddy used the word unease there, and I can sense that in your voice and the way what you're talking about it and the size and all that, and it's worrying for me that we've seen some of those little signs of that sort of creep in over the last few games. By all accounts, the players got a lot of stick on Tuesday. Fair enough. Damari Gray seemed to be remonstrating with a fan or fans after he scored. He was giving a bit back, and social media has been a bit of a horrible place this week. Feels like people are starting to dig the trenches in regards to Lampard's not good enough. Why go down the road of him? Let's get rid. Others are saying, well, we've been here so many times, haven't we? We've been through this with so many managers, and I've just sort of seen a few little green shoots of what we've seen in the past start to emerge this week. Is that what's making you feel a bit uneasy as well?
Yeah, it felt like I made the comparison before to the game, to the Crystal Palace game in the Cup, and it also felt very similar to the Hull City game in the FA Cup last year as well, especially when Damari Gray scored, and you kind of thought that even if Everton get back into this game and win it and get through, in terms of the performance and in terms of, I was scrolling on Twitter at the time, in terms of the reaction of fans, and I know really compared to the whole fan base, it's probably a very small sample size, but the semantics of it all and the attitudes towards the players and the club, and then the attention to Saturday, the damage had already been done, if you get me. And it is a bit hopeless, because I feel, in terms of what you're alluding to, I feel like I've been trying to talk myself into positives over the last couple of weeks, and that this is why we're doing this, and all we got to wait for is attacking players in the January transfer window. But the pressure on Saturday is enormous, to the point where the performance and the results the same. I really don't think it's out of the realms of possibility that Lampard loses his job going into the World Cup break. I remember the end of last season, I think there was murmurs that Moshiri had even questioned Lampard a couple of months into Lampard's reign, when you consider some of the performances and some of the results then. So if Everton to go back to back against Bournemouth and lose heavily, I don't think it's not a distinct possibility. And even if Everton win or Everton draw, regardless really of the result on Saturday, I think we are getting to a period where the first couple of games after the World Cup break, if there isn't an upturn in performances especially, then the pressure's already there, really. And I don't want to. It's tough, because I want to give Lampard a chance, but at the same time, there's only so much you can trust the process without seeing positive signs of said process, if you get me. And I know people have latched on to the defence this year, and listen, in terms of the personnel that brought in the summer, I think there's positives there, and I think there's positives to a point where, as a manager coming in after January this season is a lot different to Lampard coming in compared to 12 months ago. I think the squad's in a completely different shape. But then you can't say that and then say, well, Lampard needs time, because what happened last year was so horrendous. Because the squad, really, I know we've lost Richarlison, and let's be honest, the attacking players leave a lot to be desired. But I think we've signed 11 players since the start of last January transfer window. I know some of them aren't here anymore, in terms of Delhi, for instance, but a lot has changed, and there's only so much time, like I said, that you can kind of put your head in the sand, really.
Yeah, there's just going to be, because of how saturated the table is, there's just going to be a massive difference between a defeat and a win on Saturday. And I think the tone completely changes depending on what the result is. With victory, you're looking at maybe anything from 14th to 11th in the table. Defeat, and it is feasible that Everton are either in the relegation zone come that World Cup break or very close to it. And all of a sudden then you're dumped out of a cup. You've lost 3 or 4 on the bounce before the break, and the tone has dramatically changed. I mean, we've already seen, as we've all pointed out now, the fans get disgruntled at the vitality. We heard it at the Leicester City game, which wasn't particularly pleasant. Even when Everton was well in that game, there was still kind of an anxiety in the stadium that just kind of permeated through. I think Mick makes an interesting point about trust the process, and obviously a lot of us have spoken about how this season is going to be about incremental gains. I still think if Everton were to finish 14th or 15th, not be going into the final few weeks of the season in a relegation scrap, then that would be incremental progress from the very, very low bar of last season. So it's all on whether you see what Lampard is doing and whether you see any kind of progression in the style, whether you can see the squad morphing, whether you can see them adapting to his methods, all that kind of stuff. I think Lampard's got a really big decision to make now and also probably during the international break. And it's how far down the line he wants to take his style of play. And what we saw in the really early part of the season was him effectively continuing with the themes of last year, towards the end of last year, shutting up shop, 5 at the back, pragmatism, a little bit more direct. But I'd say since the Manchester United defeat, from that game on, he's looked to morph things into a different kind of Everton. And you've seen different principles come to the fore. So against United, one of the things that really struck me was how often the midfield were getting caught in transition, and how often Manchester United were just able to play the ball into space and you'd isolate either Cody or Tarkowski one-on-one. The same patterns against Leicester on Saturday. And I think whenever Lampard and Everton open up and look to play the way he ultimately wants to play, they have issues. It was the same last season when they got tonked away at Tottenham. That was kind of that bizarre high line that he played against Son and Harry Kane and all their kind of flair attacking players. Everton are looking to move to something more progressive, more aggressive in the way they play things, looking to press higher with 2 number 8s, looking to get in the face of the opposition. But still, the personnel's not quite there to do it. There's a huge onus on Idrissa Gueye, both offensively and defensively, in terms of starting attacks as the sole receiver in front of the back 4, but also covering huge swathes of ground when Onana and Iwobi go up the pitch. And I thought it was really, really evident that both Maddison and Dewsbury Hall were just playing in the space either side of him against Leicester. So that's a structural issue for me. That's a tactical issue. The only time Everton have looked progressive and secure this season was the Crystal Palace game. And Palace had their own issues that day. I'm well aware of the issues and the fact that Sheikh Doucouré wasn't there. That was a huge, huge blow to them. And they almost fell into some of the bad habits Everton have been in recent weeks with the 1 number 6. But what you can say about that day is that Lampard settled on a different formation, not 4-3-3, but much closer to a 4-2-3-1, with Onana providing support to Idrissa Gueye. We got a better Idrissa Gueye out of it. We got a better Amadou Onana out of it. I think that was his best performance of the season by some distance, Onana, in that deeper role. And I also think we got more out of Alex Iwobi because he was able to press high and use his energy and his creativity to help the attack. So the question I've got is, why have Everton moved away from that? It might not have worked quite as well against other opposition because they weren't playing Crystal Palace minus Sheikh Doucouré, but it was the way to go. You need to continue on that path, but again, they've deviated from it. You've got, I think, because Onana is a presence and because he opens his legs and he's got that kind of languid style, there are kind of weird comparisons with Fellaini, and he also likes to use him as a bit of extra height when Calvert-Lewin's not there. But Onana is at his least comfortable when he's in the opposition box. There was a chance that came to him against Leicester at the weekend at the back post, where his body position's all wrong, and he just sticks out an arm and handles it. Now, if that's Alex Iwobi or any of the other attacking midfielders Everton have had over the last 4 or 5 years, they take it down. James Rodriguez takes down his chest 1-0 or 1-1, whatever the score was at the time. But Onana is palpably less comfortable there than he is 30, 40 yards back when he's making a recovery tackle or playing the forward pass. It's almost like there's a misunderstanding of what Amadou Onana is at this moment in time, and a misunderstanding of how to get the best out of Idrissa Gueye and Alex Iwobi. So I think the decision now for Lampard is, does he stick with the progressive style? And if he does, is he prepared to go back to the blueprint against Palace that brought success? And I think the answer to those questions are going to tell us everything we need to know now about Lampard's, the Everton season, but also Lampard's tenure over the months to come. It's clear they need more in the January window anyway, but that there needs to be a more solid foundation from which to build, and we haven't seen that in recent weeks.
Yeah, my next point, Paddy's just absolutely nailed on the head there, in that this is not a team who is struggling to find the answer tactically, because we did that a fortnight ago, and that's tactically the most frustrating about this. this is the tactical version of playing a Wobie in the 10 at West Ham at home and then not doing it again for the next 2.5 years.
Do you see that as like an answer though, or a one-off, or do we not know yet?
Oh, well, if someone offered me that blueprint 37 more times in the Premier League, I'd have bitten your hand off. I get that it's not going to work every single week, but it saw Idrissa Gueye with a bit more support. It saw Iwobi as the kind of lone advanced central midfielder. And they look like two wingers who I picture. That's what I think Everton wingers do. They work hard, they're intelligent. Gordon and Gray, Gordon in particular, considering his poor run of form recently, had his best game in a long time against Crystal Palace. Damari Gray looked like a really intelligent footballer who made good decisions. That's not something we ordinarily say a lot of the time about Damari Gray. He's far more impulsive than that. But it looked as though tactically he had his head screwed on. A lot of work had gone into preparing that team to beat Crystal Palace. And I think to throw that out the window the week after was a little bit mind-boggling for me. Everton have kind of, on the back of a 4-1 defeat, we've kind of sorted a lot of defensive frailties from last season. And I think the biggest issue I have with including some of last season's players on Tuesday night is not just because they are technically poorer footballers, because we all know that, but I think, as Paddy alluded to, at the vitality and that kind of sense of angst which everyone has whenever we go there with that particular group of players. What you invite in is all of the frailties, probably mentally, that we had last season, in terms of suddenly becoming a team who, when they go 2 goals down, they very quickly go 4 goals down. And that was something that we've spoken about in recent shows. Not lauding the fact that we only got beat by 1 goal and look how plucky Everton have found some resolve. But we'd stopped getting battered by everyone. And that's quite important if you don't want to go down. And very quickly you see that when you bring in certain individuals and a certain mentality, which I think we all appreciate now is pretty unshakable for a lot of these players, you very quickly become one of those spineless football teams again. And that's ultimately what Tuesday night was.
I don't think there's going to be any quick fix in the current squad that takes them from relegation battlers to mid-table or even European contenders. That's just not going to happen with the paucity of the attacking options. But what you can do is you can identify issues within the squad, such as, for example, James Maddison and Keenan Dewsbury-Hall and Harvey Barnes getting far too much space in between the lines. And again, I'm not saying the 4-2-3-1 rectifies everything, but you look at the amount of work that Idrissa Gueye had to do and the amount of work James Garner had to do in a different system in the number 6 role. And you can only assume that they'd be better with a second body in there. I also think it would help their build-up play, because you've got 2 options to play into if you're a defender, and it's not quite so predictable for opposition sides, known with pressing triggers and that kind of thing. So there are some things here that you look at and you think that could be improved. That's not working. You can tell there's too much space in between the lines. And if you persevere with things the way they are, with 2 number 8s really high up the pitch, then you're probably going to struggle. And I think that's what we've seen at the moment. The balance in the midfield is quite obviously not right, and hasn't been right since the Crystal Palace game. Nothing's going to make it spot on overnight. No change, no one change or tactical tweak, but you can make improvements. And I think what we have to acknowledge is that until at least January, for this run of games before the break and the run of games just after the break, before the window opens, Everton's squad is a very particular place. They're not going to blow teams away by scoring 2, 3, 4 goals. It's a bonus if they score once in a game. At this moment in time, with the players they've got out there, particularly with Calvert-Lewin being injured. So the only way Everton are going to pick up any kind of points tally, any kind of points total, is by making sure that they go back to the solid defensive structures and foundations, grind out results, become harder to beat, all those kinds of things. At the moment, they're just giving away far too many chances. I mean, Tielemans scored an absolute worldie to give Leicester the lead, but they could have scored 2 or 3 better chances before that one went in. Even if the game had been 0-0 at halftime, Lampard still would have needed to change. So I look at it and I go, there are solutions here. There are some temporary solutions and some kind of sticking plasters for Everton to get through to the January window. And then you need to go back into the market. You need to have an injection of quality again, particularly in the final third, because as we all know, that when Everton do create chances, they're also not finishing them. They're not creating enough chances, but they're also not finishing the chances they get. And that's a potent combination.
Yeah, my overriding memory of that Leicester game is just looking to my left and just seeing Harvey Barnes just on his own running forward in front of their away fans with, nobody else in my field of vision at all. It was just seemed like that was the entire second half. But yeah, we'll get predictions what you think is going to happen on Saturday a little bit later on. But very quickly, because I know we are short of time, Paddy and Mick, you were watching Everton under 21s or under 19s?
21s.
21s played in the Premier League International Cup against Paris Saint-Germain at Walton Hall Park. Mick, are these young lads going to turn everything round and make everything all right?
I don't think so, but I do think it would be unfair.
We're setting up for a lovely Potter's point there. It's like, actually, they're all not that good.
Well, not in the short term anyway. But I think there's definitely quite a few who I think you could maybe pinpoint as ones to definitely look out for the future, or at least hopefully see them get an opportunity out on loan in January. I think it's well documented that Tom Cannon's been scoring at a really good rate this season. And speaking to Paddy last night, actually, when we were there, and I think when you compare him to the rest of the group that came on, I thought he looked the most ready. If you had to rely on someone to jump up straight away in a situation, and say we were desperate, for instance, and I know we kind of are, but and I say you'd probably say that striker is, if we are going to tap into that reserves, then the centre forward role is probably the position you'd probably look at. And I thought he looked the most developed physically and technically, probably, and obviously he got the goals, which helped, albeit one of them was from the spot. I know there was talk in the summer of him going out on loan, and I think it's probably the next step for him now. Bear in mind, you'd hope we were able to get someone in January in that position anyway. But I thought we looked really good as a whole, as a unit. Another thing we spoke about was just how everything looked a step above compared to how under 21s teams had played previously. I think it's well established that I think over the last couple of years, things under David Unsworth kind of just from even just a purely aesthetic point of view, it was not a nice watch. And I know results were okay. And to be fair, I don't think it helped. No disrespect to Hague Avenue, that the pitch they were playing on at times was probably something that looked more like a rugby pitch after a full season of rugby games. But everything just looked a bit more cohesive, looked a little bit more fluid. They were playing out from the back. The midfielders looked very, especially Isaac Price, in terms of his technical ability. There was a few times that he was gliding past players, and I was having a look at some of the PSG players that we saw last night, and some of them, especially their number 6, Emery. I thought he was really good in the opening 15 minutes, and he's someone who's already played for PSG. There was a couple of them who'd already got minutes for their first team this season. So not just at the back end of the season or in cup competitions, but in the league this season. And I thought, after the first 15 minutes, I thought you could tell like these PSG players, these look a level above. They look really good. They looked, especially from a technical part, they looked that they perform at a high level every single day. And everything grew into the game, and I was really impressed by them. And I couldn't fault any of them, to be honest. I thought they all looked really good, and it was a nice, confident, promising night. It was the type of night where you come away from was like, that's I might watch the under 21s just a bit more.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. Start them all, Frank, on Saturday. Make another 11 changes. Just play that team that beat PSG on Wednesday. I did say we were going to finish off with quiz question. So Damari Gray became the 8th player to score at Bournemouth since they got promoted back to the Premier League all those years ago in 2015. Can you name the other 7 players to score a goal at Dean Court / the Vitality Stadium in that time?
Funes Mori scored there.
Funes Mori is one, yeah. He scored in the free draw.
Barkley.
Idrissa Gueye scored, yeah.
Theo Walcott.
Theo Walcott scored, yeah.
Lukaku.
Yeah, you got 3 to get.
Kone.
No.
Calvert-Lewin.
Yeah. Scored in a 3-1 defeat from a Charles and Cross.
Yeah.
Is it going to be like an own goal or something?
No, you've missed like an extremely obvious one.
Tom Day. Oh, wait.
Tom Davis.
Wait.
The obvious one.
Give you another.
Motive 15-16, wasn't it?
Yeah.
No, never mind giving us another minute. We're here until we get them all.
It's not great listening to people. Maybe the listeners can reply to us on Twitter with the answers.
Or they can join us because we're
so far you've got Calvert-Lewin, Lukaku, Funes Mori, Walcott, Idrissa Gueye. There are 2 more.
We're not including Tuesday night.
Not including Tuesday night, no.
Has Barkley not scored?
Barkley is one, yes.
Yeah, I said that about 3 times and you just...
Oh, everyone's talking at the same time, Paddy.
Is he meant to be the obvious one?
Yeah.
Right. So how many more have we got to go?
Famously scored the winner, in inverted commas, in the free draw. And he also scored a deflected goal in the FA Cup win down there.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, and the other one's obscure.
The other one's a bit more obscure, yeah.
Defender.
What season?
So it would have been Marco Silva's first season in charge.
Zuma?
No.
Was that not the Walcott one, no?
Yeah, it was the Walcott one, yeah. It's the Walcott game, 2-2 draw. He went 2-0 up. I think he scored the second goal.
I'm nowhere.
Tosin?
No. Still playing for us. Played on Tuesday.
Keane?
Michael
Keane, yeah. Michael Keane. I'm pretty sure it's the game where he fractured his skull, didn't he, a bit later on as well?
Yeah, I
There
do
we
remember
go.
actually.
I try to wipe these games out of my mind, Matt, because it's all trauma that I could do without.
Richarlison also got sent off in that one, didn't he? And we went 2-0 up. We went 2-0 up with 10 men, and then they had a player sent off, and we somehow let it go back to 2-0. Just such a house of horrors for us, that place. Very quickly from each of you, what's going to happen on Saturday, Mose?
I'll be optimistic and say we're good enough to score, but we can't keep clean sheets, so we'll draw 1-1.
Mick?
I was not confident in either game this week. I don't think we'll win. It's difficult because like you kind of expect a big reaction after Tuesday, don't you? You know.
No, I do.
I feel like if it was us, if we'd beaten, but say we beaten Bournemouth 4-1 at home on Tuesday, yeah, they would 100% be beating us on Saturday. Like that's just how it works. But I can't see us winning. I definitely can't see us keeping a clean sheet. I'll go 1-1.
Paddy, full house.
Full house of 1-1, and that's just because I don't want to predict another Everton defeat again.
Yeah.
1-1. 1-1. But what does that mean in terms, because we were talking earlier about this binary. We were talking about, like, for example, you can push on and you could end up relative safety of mid-table, a defeat, and you could be in the relegation zone there or thereabouts. What does a draw do?
I'm still very much in the mindset.
Result.
Yeah, I'm still very much in the mindset that for this Everton team, any point away from home is a good point. This point
I'm kind of there with that. That was my response after Fulham.
It allows us to just kind of blissfully stroll into the next 6 weeks of our lives just in a state of mild contentment, which is pretty much the summary of Evertonian life.
Yeah.
I think most of us will take that point right now.
I could definitely see it being a 1-1 as well. Like, sort of, we have like 4 shots and score like a scabby goal from a set piece, and they have about 25, and Pickford makes a load of saves, and Tarkowski and Cody make a load of blocks. But
and then Junior Stanislas pops up at the back post.
Yeah, Bournemouth win 2-1 then.
Just looking back at those games before, he scored twice in that
games.
He scored twice in that 3-3 draw in. He's still giving us nightmares after all those years.
Horrible, man.
The Vitality Stadium's cancelled. Junior Stanislas is cancelled.
Knocking on the edge, Junior. Bloody hell, lad. We'll leave it there anyway. Sure. Great show, lads. I really enjoyed that, despite the negative and glib topics at times. But it is open. We can get something on Saturday, and as Mo said, blissfully get into the World Cup. Come back against Wolves on Boxing Day with a good chance to move up the table. But cheers to Mick, Paddy, and Mosey. We'll be back again after the game on Saturday. Dave Downey at the helm for post-match. I believe Les is doing that with him as well, so look out for that. If you want more from us as ever, it's patreon.com/the Blue Room Extra. We're going to be building up to that game. We're doing loads of bits and pieces throughout the winter and over the World Cup as well. So, yeah, we'll see you on the other side. Up the toffees. Take care.